the individual kids sitting in their classes. How do you hold teachers accountable for that? And you guys get this, right? It's not like the unions have suddenly had a come to Jesus moment and are going to vote for conservative president next time. But this proves the point I'm trying to make. The unions have woken, who all dramatically supported this at first because it's big government, it's big money being spent. Now they don't want it. Why? Because they realize that they are not in control of their teachers anymore. The feds are in control of all of it. And if I have to choose between the unions and the feds, I'll hold my nose and choose the teachers' unions every time. Because this federal government, as you're going to see, right? But you know how it is in politics, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. It is just shocking that they continue to tell you that Common Core is a tinfoil hat right-wing issue. It's not. The screams and howls from the left are every bit as deafening as from the right. By the way, Dennis Van Roekel's not the president of the NEA anymore. He lost the presidency to a woman, a female candidate, who ran on an anti-Common Core program. How's that, right? And now you got, how about the nation's second largest teachers union? How about the American Federation of Teachers? Oh, and this by far is the more progressively radical of the two unions. This is the really left-wing one. And notice the date, 8 months ago in July. In a major surprise, the American Federation of Teachers, the country's second largest teachers union, opened its convention by announcing a step back from support for Common Core. The AFT will now provide monetary grants to teachers who want to criticize the standards or even write entirely new ones. Think about what that means. If you're a teacher in a state like Massachusetts, and the teachers union wants Common Core, and the state wants Common Core, how do you dare speak out against it? You've got no protection. People keep saying, well, teachers seem to like Common Core. They've got no choice. The ones who don't like it have been, I got a folder at home, this thick, from all the states I've been to. Letters from superintendents and principals threatening teachers. This is America, you have the right to free speech, but not in this classroom. You either get on board with Common Core or you find yourself a new job. And you know what's interesting? In a state like New York, where the teachers union backed out of Common Core, guess what's happening in New York now? Teachers are speaking out by the thousands. Why? Because the teachers know now that if they speak out, the union will support them if the state tries to fire them. In a state like Massachusetts, where the teachers are caught between the union, who's going along, and the state, how do you voice? So you're a teacher, what do you do? Right? You have no control over this. Your career is based on how your kids do on these exams that you have no say over. The AFT's executive council, well, we said that. How about this? Common Core has also seen other opposition from the left as well, particularly from a new faction of almost 100,000 left-wing teachers who call themselves the Badass Teachers Association, and many of whose members also belong to the AFT. The Badass Teachers, or the BATs, they're over about 150,000 now. They formed almost exclusively to fight Common Core from the left. Believe it or not, the Badass Teachers are standing arm in arm with Tea Party activists across the country because they both have this in common. And what do they both agree on? What Common Core does to special needs kids and the kids who are already struggling. It's the kiss of death for those kids. And that's why these two groups have mobilized. And one of my personal favorites, how about President Obama's backyard? How about the Chicago Teachers Union? And when you say the Chicago Teachers Union, by the way, this has got to be the most radical, progressive, crazy city teachers union in the country. Do you know who their Martin Luther King Day speaker was for the elementary school kids? The Reverend Jeremiah Wright. How's that? Kind of hard to turn that into a right-wing group, right? The lady in the picture, that's Karen Lewis. She is the president of the Chicago Teachers Union. And you know, Karen is an avowed Marxist socialist. That's her politics. And she was actually going, and you know how I know she's a Marxist socialist? She was going to run for mayor of Chicago, and she was going to run to the left of Rahm Emanuel. See, I didn't think you could get anything but dryer lint between the left and Rahm Emanuel. But she was going to run. Now, I think she's developed cancer, so she dropped out of the race. But she's still the president of the Chicago Union. Let me give you a direct quote. This is all direct quote from Karen Lewis, and notice the date, May of 2014. Quote, "I agree with educators and parents from across the country. The Common Core mandate represents an overreach of federal power into personal privacy. That's all the data gathering. It also represents an overreach of federal power into state educational autonomy. Can I just put my professor hat back on for one more minute? The word of the day, kids, is irony. I will use it in a sentence. It is ironic that a Marxist socialist sees Common Core as too much government. Now that's irony, right? She's right. When you got Karen Lewis telling you that Common Core is too much government involvement, right? How about this? Do we have any teachers here, by the way? Okay, teachers, you hold me accountable if I'm telling a lie here, right? Karen Lewis says, Common Core eliminates creativity in the classroom and impedes collaboration. As teachers, aren't there days when you have to close the book, set the curriculum aside, because you got 25 kids staring at you with deer-in-the-headlight looks? The best teachers are the ones who can go off script, who can create, who can put everything away and figure out how to reach the kid sitting in front of them. How do you do that when the whole thing is orchestrated? How do you do that when the whole thing is top-down, screwed? You can't. Screwed down, you can't. That's what Karen Lewis is telling you. We also know, and she's right about this, we also know that high-stakes standardized tests are designed to rank and sort our children, and they contribute significantly to racial discrimination and the achievement gap in American schools. And she's 100% right. You know, do you honestly think, does anybody honestly think, you're going to create one exam for 60 million kids and it's going to tell you anything? There is no way you can create one exam for every third grader in the country that's going to tell your teacher what your daughter's doing in that class. It's impossible. They prove nothing, these tests. They are meaningless. And yet, and we've been doing standardized testing for 40 years. By the way, anybody know when this crave for national testing started? It really got started when we created the Department of Education. We managed to educate American kids quite well in this country for a couple hundred years, until we created the Department of Education. And all those billions of dollars that used to go directly to the states now had to funnel through the Department of Education. So of course, they wanted to hold on to as much of that money as they could. So what did they do? They hired, believe it or not, they hired textbook companies like Pearson, McGraw-Hill. They hired textbook companies to create big national exams. And guess what those exams in the early 80s proved? Gee, our kids are stupid all of a sudden. Wait, so you got textbook companies whose job it is to sell you new stuff every year. And their tests proved that our kids were failing. You know, think about it. I was alive in the 1970s. I was very young, but I was alive. And I remember the 1970s. It's not like in the 1970s, moms and dads started saying, gee, our kids are stupid. It's not like universities like the one I teach at in Wisconsin started turning kids away because they didn't know anything. Who concluded that our kids were failing? It wasn't teachers, it wasn't parents, it wasn't colleges, it was these exams. So guess what we had to do? We threw out all the curriculum, all the pedagogy, all the textbooks, and we had to buy all new. And have you noticed over the last 40 years, every 4 or 5 years we throw everything out and start over? Because who's making money off of this, right? The people who wrote the tests. Do you know how much money the Smarter Balance and the PARC consortiums are making every year testing your kids? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And the tests prove nothing. And that's why I'm confident that sooner or later Common Core will go away. Not because we'll get rid of the idea, but because we'll rename it and have to sell you more stuff. All right? That's what this is. I mean, think about it. We managed to put a man on the moon. We created the generation we educated the generation that put a man on the moon with less technology available to them than your cell phone. The phone in your pocket has more technology on it than the stuff we use to get people to the moon. And we somehow characterized that educational system as a failure. Who did it? These people, the Department of Education, big government, in conjunction with a couple of hand-picked companies. Can I give you one more point? And we got teachers here, you hold me accountable. Nothing has changed as far as mathematics education. Nothing has changed in math for kids from 5 years old to 15 years old. Nothing. Have we invented a new number and slipped it in somewhere? Have we been inventing new geometrical theorems that I'm old? No. I get that when you're dealing with calculus, but I'm talking about 90% of your kids' math education in elementary, middle, and high school. It hasn't changed in 2,000 years. And if that's true, Shouldn't you be able to buy one textbook and use it for 60 years? Of course. And if that's the case, then companies like Pearson make no money. And so what is this all about, Common Core? What it is you've got a small group of crony capitalist companies, like Microsoft, for instance, who are getting rich doing this. And what does the government get? They get power and control, right? And that's what Marxist socialist Karen Lewis is telling you. And not only did Karen Lewis say this personally, but the Chicago Teachers Union crafted 30 different anti-Common Core resolutions. Can't read them all, just read you a couple. Here's the Chicago resolution. Quote, instructional and curriculum decisions should be in the hands of classroom teachers who understand the context and interests of the students. Doesn't that make sense? The professional educators should be the ones to try to determine the best way to teach. It's not going to happen at Common Core. How about this? The education of children should be grounded in developmentally appropriate practice. The first person to tell you that Common Core is not appropriate education for your kids isn't me. I'll tell you a lot. It's the Chicago Teachers Union. And we'll see that. She's right about that, too. And this is really big. Notice the date here. A couple months ago, January 2015. The entire Washington State Democrat Party called for an immediate pullout of Common Core from the state of Washington. This is a big deal. If you're a Democrat in Washington, and let's face it, Washington State is every bit the big liberal state that Massachusetts is. Right? And so if you're going to run for office in Washington State, and let's face it, most people who run for office in Washington State are Democrats. If you're going to run, you have to adopt this plank, or you get no state money. A couple of months ago, if I didn't tell you it was Washington State Democrat Party, you would think what you're about to hear came right from a Tea Party. Listen to what the Washington State Democrats said. The Central Committee of the Washington State Democrat Party passed a resolution roundly condemning the Common Core standards. This is the first time a statewide Democrat Party committee has taken a public position against Common Core, and it happened in the backyard of the Gates Foundation, who paid for all of this. So in Chicago, Barack Obama's backyard, the Chicago Union has absolutely repudiated it. In the state of Washington, Seattle, where Gates has his organization, the whole state Democrat Party has repudiated it. Here's the resolution. Whereas the copyrighted and therefore unchangeable Common Core standards are a set of controversial, top-down academic standards that were promulgated by wealthy private interests without any research-based evidence that they're going to work, and that are developmentally inappropriate in the lowest grades. And whereas, as a means of avoiding the U.S. Constitution's 10th Amendment prohibition against federal meddling in state education policy, can I just do a little dance? You got Democrats citing the Constitution? Whereas, as a means of avoiding the Constitution, state-led, you say, two private, unaccountable trade associations, the MGA and the CCSSO, have received millions of dollars in funding from the Gates Foundation, whereas the U.S. Department of Education improperly pressured state legislatures into adopting the Common Core and the high-stakes tests as a condition of competing for federal race-to-the-top stimulus funds. Money that should have been doled out based on need, not on coercion. And whereas the implementation of Common Core is going to cost local school districts hundreds of millions of dollars to pay for standardized computer-based tests, new technology, new curricula, and teacher training, at a time when Washington State is already insufficiently funding K-12 basic education. All this for something that has no proven benefit to students. And whereas states have already begun the process of pulling out of Common Core, therefore be it resolved that we call upon the Washington State Legislature and the Superintendent of Public Instruction to withdraw from Common Core and keep K-12 education student-centered and accountable to the people of Washington State. That's amazing, isn't it? And Massachusetts How come the liberals that run your state aren't looking out for your kids the way they are? Because this has nothing to do with right-wing morons, as they call us, right? Nothing to do, there's no tinfoil anywhere near this. Look, you give me a week, I'll lay out the whole conservative case against Common Core. You give me another week, I'll lay out Christian scholars' objection to Common Core. But we don't even need to go there. Because we live in a weird world, don't we? Where the political letter in front of your name determines whether your facts are true or not. Okay, fair enough. Don't listen to me, don't argue with me. Let's see what these people are doing. I don't see a conservative in the room yet, right? Up on the board here. How about this? I mentioned this to you. You took roughly $600 million, Massachusetts, one way or another. More, probably, if we ever had an accurate auditing of your books. But certainly no less than $600 million you took to take this nonsense. That's more than it's going to cost your state in 1 year just to do the testing. Did you get your money's worth? Let me give you an example. California. The state of California, notice the date here, 3 months ago, January 3rd, 29th, 2015. The state of California could be liable for as much as $1 billion a year in costs if a group of California school districts succeeds in winning reimbursement for expenses associated with the implementation of computer-based tests in the Common Core and other standards. 4 unified California school districts, Santa Ana, Vallejo, Plumas, and Porterville, and the Plumas County Office of Education, filed a claim to classify the new tests as state mandates. Well, of course they are. No school district in California took the standards. The state took it. The state took it and said, you're going to have to teach it. Then guess who's responsible for paying for the tests? It's not the schools, it's the state. And when we say the state, that means who's going to pay for this? You are, right? And now I know they call you Taxachusetts. I know that. I've heard that in Wisconsin, right? But can you afford every year what you're going to have to spend? Is it worth the money you spend? This is California. If the Commission on State Mandates agrees, and I don't see how they can't, if the State Mandate Commission says no, it's not the state's responsibility, then those schools are going to have to shut their doors, aren't they? Where are they going to come up with this money? And so what happens? The districts contend that unlike the old pencil and paper tests, the new computer-based tests require districts to buy computers, expand internet bandwidth capacity, install wireless connections, hire computer technicians, and train staff. In its filing, Santa Ana, the biggest of the 4 school districts with about 50,000 students, said it expects to spend about $12 million this year and last year alone on devices and bandwidth expansion, including another $124,000 on staff time. The claim estimates that the statewide cost for all districts for 1 year to test these kids at $1 billion. California took about $900 million to take Common Core. You got ripped off, right? They took $900 million. They're going to spend all that this year alone just to test those kids. And then, this is state-led, right? Okay, it's state-led. If it's state-led, then why are the feds threatening every state that wants to pull out? Note the date here, January 31st, 2015. I already explained Chicago to you. So this is what's wonderful. The entire state of Illinois is on board with Common Core. The entire state of Illinois is testing all their kids, except the city of Chicago. The city of Chicago said they're only going to offer these meaningless tests to 10% of their student body. That's it. And for that, the federal government is threatening to withhold Illinois' entire education budget for this year. How do you argue that it's state-led when that's happening? Chicago Public Schools' decision to administer new tests, Common Core tests, to only about 10% of the city's 600 schools could cost the state over $1 billion in federal aid. In a recent letter to Illinois School Superintendent Christopher Koch from Assistant U.S. Education Secretary Deborah Delisle, made it clear the state could lose as much as $1.17 billion in federal education funding next year if Chicago schools don't comply with Common Core testing requirements. Do you understand now what I mean when I say whoever controls these tests controls what your kids do, what your teachers teach? That's why the feds are threatening. The whole state of Illinois is on board, except for this one district, right? And for that, the feds say, you either test all those kids, every one of them, or we're cutting you completely off. The states have nothing to do with this. This is a federal takeover of education. And you're going to be the ones paying for it. But don't listen to me. Because, you know, I got my silly little Wisconsin shoes on. You may not like bald guys. I understand. The great thing about all this is you don't have to listen to me. Because the people who did this to you told you exactly why they were doing it. How many of you have heard the argument that Common Core is rigorous? How many of you have heard the argument that Common Core has been measured and benchmarked? Okay, let's listen to what Bill Gates has to say about this. Here's Bill Gates in 2013.
It would be great if our education stopped working, but that we won't know for probably a decade.
So in 2013, 2 years ago, Bill Gates said, it would be nice to know if our education stuff is going to work. But we're not going to know that for 10 years. How can you argue it's rigorous when they don't even know it's going to work? How can you argue it's been benchmarked when the guy who paid for it says, it'll be 2013 before we have any idea if it works? You know, way back in 2002 when George Bush gave us No Child Left Behind, it took about 10 years before we figured out it was a disaster and got rid of it. How much money was thrown down that rat hole? And you're going to wait another 10. How many kids have been miseducated in that generation? Now you're going to throw more money down this rat hole for what? The difference between Common Core and No Child Left Behind, by the way, the only difference, is that if you don't stop Common Core, then you will never be able to fix education in Massachusetts again because it'll all devolve to the feds. You still, Massachusetts, if you got your act together, could reassert control over your kids' education. You could tomorrow reinstate the Massachusetts standards that you used before this. If you did that, then the feds would be out of your hair. Oh, and keep in mind, too, that $1.17 billion that the feds are cutting from Illinois, that's less than 7% of the state's overall education budget. Does that give you a sense of the magnitude of numbers we're talking here? The feds are going to withhold over $1 billion from Illinois. That's only 6% of what Illinois spends on education every year. But now ask yourself this. Do you understand, Massachusetts, how easy it would be for you to make up that? In your case, it's 5%. The money you get from the federal government amounts to about 5% of what you spend every year on education in the state. Get the feds out of it. You could make that 5% up easy, right? Add another toll. My God, add another toll. Right? And dedicate it. You make that 5% up. You pay that 5% yourself. And that you can tell the feds to kiss your behind. You don't have to do anything they say. You had better standards. What did you sell your soul for? And how many of you have heard? Now, I think the single biggest, the most dangerous lie of Common Core is this one. How many of you have heard this? Common Core is just a set of standards. It's not curriculum. Teachers can teach what they want. We'll think about that for a second. Your teachers went home one bright June morning for summer vacation. They came back in September, and all the textbooks had been pulled. And in their place were new Common Core textbooks, or better yet, a lot of uploaded stuff onto the computers by companies like Pearson. How did your teachers learn how to teach Common Core? The only thing they had was the pedagogy, the textbooks. The idea that the standards, you can reach the standards any way you want is BS. All the old textbooks are gone. Your teachers are being forced to teach from what's been handed to them. And the textbook companies who did this, companies like Pearson, they were in the room working with the Common Core people about how to create the textbooks. How do you argue they're separate? Well, don't listen to me. Let's listen to Bill Gates on this. Listen to this little gem.
We'll only know if this effort has succeeded when the curriculum and tests are aligned to these standards. Secretary Arnie Duncan recently announced that $350 million of the stimulus package will be used to create just these kinds of tests. Next generation assessments align to the Common Core. When the tests are aligned to the Common standards, the curriculum will line up as well.
When the tests are aligned to the Common Core standards, and right now your kids are being tested, then the curriculum will line up. When your teachers, as they're finding out right now, figure out that the only thing on those tests is the Common Core stuff, they will have no choice but to teach what we want them to. Do you understand the insidiousness of this? And did you also hear him admit that that money got siphoned away from the stimulus package and given to Arnie Duncan? Arnie Duncan, your Secretary of Education, you know he's never been a classroom teacher. How do we elect to the highest education, appoint I should say, to the highest educational office in the land somebody who's never been a teacher? Do you know what Arnie Duncan's background is in? He's a sociologist. That makes perfect sense.
Basketball player.
And a basketball player, yeah. And there's that too, right? Both David Coleman and Bill Gates happen to be homosexuals, right? Not Bill Gates, I'm sorry, David Coleman and Arnie Duncan. And the interesting thing about this is, with regards to the question of that $350 million stimulus, why would you appoint a sociologist to the chief educational office in the country? Well, I think you're already beginning to see that Common Core really was never meant to be about education. It's about sociology. It's about reshaping your kids, about driving a wedge between parents, and you'll see that coming up, between parents and children, about convincing your kids that they belong primarily to the state and not to you. You'll see that very shortly. But, again, don't listen to me. You really think that these are benign standards that give your teachers all kinds of flexibility to meet them? Well, that's David Coleman. That's the guy who wrote them. Now in charge of the SATs and all the advanced placement exams your kids are going to have to take. He's rewriting. I want you to listen to what David Coleman said about your teachers' freedom. Because your state politicians have been guaranteeing you our teachers are free. Your state teachers union has been telling you we can teach what we want. Okay, are you going to believe them, or are you going to believe the guy who wrote the standards?
Which is teachers will teach towards the test. There is no force strong enough on this earth to prevent that. There's no amount of hand waving. There's no amount of saying they teach the standards, not the test. We don't do that here, whatever.
He's bigger than the president. He's bigger than the king. There is no force on this earth that's going to prevent your teachers to teaching to our test. So when you go and you take this to your principal and your superintendent, they're going to look at you glassy-eyed and tell you the lie again. No, our teachers are free. Right? They're going to tell you this was state-led, the governors did this. All they've got left is repeating the lies. There's nothing else. There is no argument. There is no evidence for anything they tell you. That's what's so maddening about this. You don't need me. The people who did this told you what they were doing. I'm going to play that again. A short clip. Take it from him. Listen to the arrogance. Listen to the definitiveness of this.
Which is teachers will teach towards the test. There is no force strong enough on this earth to prevent that. There's no amount of hand waving. There's no amount of saying they teach the standards, not the test. We don't do that here, whatever.
There's David Coleman. And how about the future president of the United States?
Oh my God.
1 week ago, 5 days ago, in Iowa, she was asked about Common Core. 5 days ago. Listen to this.
You know, when I think about the really unfortunate argument that's been going on around Common Core, it's very painful. How do we end up at a point where we are so negative about the most important non-family enterprise in the raising of the next generation, which is how our kids are educated?
The most important non-family enterprise is education. She's already cut you out. They're not your kids. They do not belong to you. You do not have the primacy of what and when and what and how they learn. Education is the single most important non-family thing your kids are ever going to do. And there's the successor to all of this, right? And if you're a homeschool mom and dad, you tell me what you just heard there. You tell me how you think. It may not, look, homeschooling is not going away tomorrow or next year or even in 5 years. But you tell me with an attitude like that, how long, if they nail down Common Core, you tell me how long you're going to be free to do this. The most important non-family, and I can think of nothing more family-oriented than education. I can think of no thing more central to the evolution, the development, the progress, the maturity of your kids in education, and she's cut you out, and the feds have cut you out, not good. Go to this center, the Center for Teaching Quality, February 2015. They've done a very detailed analysis-based examination of how much time is going to be spent testing for Common Core in every class year. Fourth graders, the average fourth grader in this country is going to spend 51 days of a 180-day school year testing. And keep in mind that fourth grade isn't even one of the main testing years. Third grade is. Testing, prepping, and it makes sense. If the only thing your teachers are getting evaluated on are these tests, then they're going to have to prepare them for the tests. They're going to have to practice tests. They're going to have to test repeatedly. And if they're doing all that testing, guess what they're not doing?